The global bond market is flashing a warning signal right now that we hasn't seen in over 4 decades. And before you roll your eyes and think this is just another doomsday pitch, you should really just stop. What I'm about to show you isn't alarmism or some conspiracy theory. It's just cold and hard and unavoidable mathematics. If you're sitting there right now with all of your life savings parked comfortably in a traditional banking system, thinking you're safe, you're in the crosshairs of an invisible erosion that could wipe out 30% of your purchasing power over the next few years. Yes, you heard that right. 30% is just gone. And it's not even because the stock market crashed. It's not because you made a bad trade, it's because the system itself is structurally designed to siphon it away. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what the large institutions are doing right now. These are the quiet moves they rarely explain to the public, something they like to call an Antifragile Asset Framework. The trade-off is that you'll have to unlearn everything you've been taught about saving, about risk, and about what actually constitutes security. By the end of this, you'll know how to spot the real opportunities when everyone else is panicking. You'll know how to identify undervalued assets and build a household financial defense system that actually works when the environment breaks down. Let's get one thing straight. Most of us are conditioned to believe that investing is purely an offensive game. It's about chasing the highest yield and finding the next big tech stock, but you need to throw that mindset out the window. In the current economic cycle we're navigating right now, you'll see that the primary objective has completely shifted. Your number one job right now isn't to get rich quick. It's to ensure the wealth you've already built doesn't quietly disappear. If you want to understand what's coming, just look at the stagflation era of the 1970s. The lesson there is painfully clear, and history is rhyming right now louder than ever. In the 70s, the people who stubbornly clung to cash, who thought putting money under the mattress was the safe play, watched as 80% of their real purchasing power evaporated. But the people who understood the mechanics of debt played a different game. They used low-interest borrowing to acquire tangible assets. While the middle class was getting crushed, these people leaped into different wealth brackets. What we're witnessing today isn't unprecedented. We've seen this movie before. We're just watching a modern remake. Let's talk about your bank, because bank balance sheets are becoming increasingly fragile in this current climate. The structural momentum of the financial sector is shifting in ways that should have everyone paying very close attention. This is why we have to move away from fragile paper wealth and transition toward resilient and tangible value. And no, before you ask, I'm not telling you to go bury gold bars in your backyard out of some sense of sheer paranoia. I'm talking about building a mathematically sound portfolio designed to absorb systemic shocks and eat inflation for breakfast. To do that, we really need to uncover a reality that's rarely discussed openly in the mainstream media. Let me ask you a very basic question. When liquidity dries up in the market, where does your money actually go? The assumption that your local bank is just safeguarding your hard-earned cash in some giant steel vault is a cartoonish misconception. That's not how this works. When you deposit your money, it doesn't sit idle or take a nap. It's immediately deployed. The bank lends it out and takes a massive chunk of your deposits to buy government and institutional bonds for themselves. Think back to the last decade. We had a prolonged era of near-zero interest rates where money was practically free. During that time, banks were forced into buying long-duration bonds with pathetic yields, sometimes as low as 1% or 2%. What did that mean for you? It meant your highly liquid deposits were quietly transformed into a liquid long-term debt. It's the cash you think you can just withdraw at any second, but it's tied up for 10 or 20 or even 30 years. When the seas are calm, that system works perfectly, but look outside right now, the seas are not calm. In today's environment, inflation is persistent and interest rates have been hiked aggressively compared to the free money era of the 2010s. Now the cracks in the foundation are highly visible. Just think about the math behind it all. If the government issues bonds paying 5%, who wants to buy the old bonds your bank holds paying only 1%? Nobody wants them, and because nobody wants them, the market value of those old bonds simply drops off a cliff. Now the banks will tell you it's fine, claiming they can just hold these bonds to maturity and get their principal back. Technically they're right, but they have one fatal flaw in that logic, and that flaw is you, the depositor. You don't operate on a 20-year timeline, and when economic stress hits, businesses suddenly need to make payroll. Households need to pay higher bills while people need liquidity. And when fear enters the chat, it triggers waves of withdrawals. If too many people want their money at once, the bank can't wait. They're forced to sell those bonds at a loss. Suddenly, what they called an unrealized loss on a spreadsheet becomes very real financial devastation. Silicon Valley Bank in 2023 wasn't just an accident of bad management. It was a flashing symptom of structural imbalance. It's a deep imbalance that affects the entire banking system, and by extension, it affects your life savings. So let's bring this right to your front door and look at the actual mathematics of how your purchasing power is being bled out. Many households look at their savings account growing by 3% a year, and they feel a warm, fuzzy sense of security. The number's going up, but that's just a psychological trap, because wealth isn't measured by numbers on a screen. True wealth is measured exclusively by what that money can actually buy in the real world. When you look at your actual expenses like grocery bills and healthcare, you realize the true rate of inflation is dramatically higher. It's much higher than the neatly packaged numbers the government hands out. So let's be incredibly conservative for a moment. If real-world inflation is running at 8% and your money is earning 3%, you're not making money. You're mathematically losing 5% of your purchasing power every single year, and that's just the cold reality of the system. You won't see a line item on your bank statement that says minus 5% wealth tax, but it's definitely happening right now. It's a silent and relentless transfer of wealth away from you, and it doesn't matter how hard you've worked to earn it. Have you ever heard of the rule of 72? It's a simple formula where you divide 72 by your rate of loss. At a 5% annual loss in purchasing power, your accumulated wealth will literally be cut in half in about 14 years. Your wealth is cut in half, not because you spent it, but because you sat still in an inherently inflationary system. This isn't an accident. It's just the natural and inevitable outcome of remaining passive while the system slowly grinds you down. Governments around the world are staring down massive and unpayable debt burdens, but they're never going to choose the path of austerity. Austerity means cutting spending and raising taxes, which is just political suicide, so they'll always choose the invisible tax instead. They simply inflate the debt away and print new money, which enters the system through large financial institutions and corporations first. These entities get early access to cheap capital, using it to sweep up real assets before the prices have a chance to adjust. By the time that newly printed money finally trickles down to your paycheck, the damage is already done and everyone is lost. It manifests as a $7 box of cereal or a massive spike in housing costs, making life more expensive for everyone. Inflation is a mechanism that rewards those closest to the money printer, while mercilessly penalizing anyone who relies on an hourly wage. So the $1 million question is what exactly you do about it, and step one is building a defensive fortress. This phase isn't about getting rich. It's about survival and making sure the floor doesn't fall out from under you. You must diversify your reliance away from traditional fractional reserve banking because that's a non-negotiable part of your defense system. Take a portion of your liquid wealth, maybe 10% to 15%, and move it into physical gold right now. I'm talking about physical gold or fully allocated instruments, not paper derivatives that carry too much counterparty risk for my liking. Gold isn't a tech stock, and it's not going to double in a month because its singular job is acting as an anchor. It preserves your purchasing power and provides ultimate stability when the systemic stress finally hits the fan, as it always does. Layer 2 of your defense is stepping into scarcity, which means you need to acquire productive and hard assets with tangible value. We're talking about high-quality commercial real estate or prime agricultural land, things that provide real utility regardless of market swings. When inflation spikes, the cost to build new apartments spikes too, meaning the buildings you already own just went up in value. These assets have pricing power, but don't you dare touch over-leveraged or speculative garbage that relies entirely on cheap debt and hype. If an asset needs hype to survive, it'll be the first thing to get vaporized in a sudden and violent liquidity crunch. You absolutely must have liquidity, but you have to structure it intelligently instead of leaving it in a fragile regional bank. Look at short-term government instruments like treasury bills with maturities of 1 to 3 months because they give you flexibility. They're backed by the government and offer competitive yields, and you won't be trapped if interest rates suddenly swing wildly. Pause and ask yourself a blunt question. If the banking system froze tomorrow, would you have enough liquidity to feed your family? Do you have enough outside the system cash to pay your bills for 3 solid months while the world around you panics? If your answer is no, then stop worrying about the stock market and fix that exact problem today. It's your priority. Once your fortress is built and your defense is locked in, only then do we pivot to offense and strategic debt. Most people are terrified of debt for good reason because consumer debt is nothing but financial poison that destroys your future. Borrowing money at 22% to buy a depreciating car is active destruction, but debt can actually be a powerful weapon. In a high inflation environment, fixed rate debt is a beautiful thing because its real-world value declines every single year. You're paying back the bank with money that's worth significantly less than what you originally borrowed, which is a massive opportunity. The secret is taking that borrowed capital and deploying it directly into assets that produce consistent and reliable cash flow. During periods of tight liquidity, highly valuable assets get dumped at steep discounts because over-leveraged players are forced to liquidate. If you have your liquidity ready, you get to be the one buying when there is blood in the streets, literally. Look for opportunities in sectors people cannot live without, like energy and utilities or food production and healthcare industries. These sectors have absolute pricing power because even if the prices go up, people will still find a way to pay. Ultimately, the hardest part of executing this framework isn't the math, It's the psychological battle of having cold discipline. It requires the patience to sit on your hands and the emotional control to stay calm when the media screams. Stop reacting to the daily noise in the 24-hour news cycle and start watching indicators that govern global economy. Watch the gold to silver ratio as a historical barometer for sentiment because it shows when big money moves to fear. Keep an eye on credit spreads and the gap between junk bonds and safe government bonds while the system chokes. When that gap widens, it means danger. So watch the total money supply and wait for the central banks to pivot. When the money printer turns back on to bail out the system, that is your signal to finally make your move. When the fear is peaking and the monetary expansion resumes, that's when the massive wealth transfer finally happens. You just have to decide which side of the transfer you want to be on, because the system doesn't care. Financial systems operate on ruthless and mathematical realities, and complaining that the game is rigged won't help you at all. Understanding the rules allows you to navigate the mess and exploit inefficiencies to protect your family from what's coming next. Build your foundation and secure your liquidity so you can position yourself to strike when the market eventually breaks. You can absolutely survive this and even thrive if you play it right, so take this information very seriously. If this framework has changed your view of the financial matrix, you should share it with your household today. When the storm hits, having your family aligned and moving in the same direction is the ultimate anti-fragile asset.